Hilchas Schirus, Perik Shmini. Now the first three prokim of Hilchas Schirus, the Rambam spoke about Hilchas Shemrim, the Chiyuvim Bechlal of the Dalit Shemrim, and that they have Gimel Halachas, and specifically the dinim of Shemer Sacher and a Secher. That's the first three prokim. Then the Rambam spoke about the dinim if a person was Secher an animal. If a person is Secher a behem, and various dinim of how if he used the animal, not the way L'chatchila made up, and what rights he has. So these are the next two prokim. Dalit and Hayes talks about the dinim of being Secher behem, and if the behemoth dies, and what chiyuvim the masker has towards the Secher, and what chiyuvim the Secher has towards the masker when a person rents an animal. Then there was the dinim in Perik Vav, and Perik Vav and Perik Zayin. The Rambam speaks about the dinim of renting a house. When a person rents a house, again, what kind of chiyuvim does the masker have to the Secher, and what kind of chiyuvim does the Secher have to the masker? And now in Perik Ches, the Rambam was going to speak about renting a field. If a person rents a field, and in renting a field, you can have two deals. Either you're going to have a deal that you're going to pay him as fixed amount, either a fixed amount in money or a fixed amount in Paris. And that's basically the same idea. And then there's an idea that you're not paying a fixed amount, you're paying a certain percentage. You're a sharecropper, which is called an oris, that you have that you're going to give a certain percentage of the produce of the field to the balabas. These are the dinim we're going to learn now. Perik Shmini. Echad asecher michaveri soda lezora ikerem lechel peresa bedam. The same thing would apply if a person, let's say, rents a field from someone in order to plant the field, or a vineyard in order to take the peiros, and he's going to pay money for it. The deal was how much money he's going to pay for it. Oy shesacher mimenu, the peiros ksuvim, or the deal was that he's going to give him a certain amount of peiros. Ken shesacher mimenu soda zu, he's renting this field, be'esrim kur b'shana, he's going to give him 20 kur a year. A kur is 30 so he's going to give him 20 kur a year. Or v'kerem zeh, he's renting this vineyard, and the deal is be'esrim kadi yayin b'chol shana, he's going to give him 20 jugs of wine every year. Ishneim din echad yeshlim, they have both the same din, because they're both basically, he's renting it, and there's a fixed amount how much he has to pay. And a secher bepeiros hu anikra chayker. A secher bepeiros is called a chayker, and there are specific dinim b'negei a chayker which peiros he should give him, but basically they both of them have the same idea, the same din, which is that he's renting a field, and the deal is that he's going to give him a certain amount to pay for it. Either he's going to give him a certain amount of money, or he's going to give him a certain amount of peiros. Halacha beis hamekabel sode oipardis kedei lavid oitzai uleheitzi olav yitzias, and then the itn lebalakarka shlisha tvuah erivia. When a person takes a field from someone, and the deal is he's going to work on the field, and he's going to spend money on that field, and then he's going to give the owner of the field a certain percentage of the produce. He's going to be working on the field, and he's going to give the owner of the field either a third of the tvuah or a quarter of the tvuah, or whatever the deal is. That's called a mekabel. So we have a mitzvah of someone that's rents a field. He's a seicher. And al der of a choiker, the difference between a seicher and a choiker is only that the seicher is paying money and the choiker is paying with tvuah or with yayin. And then there's a mekabel. With the mekabel to the tai, she's paying a certain percentage. Now, kol davar shehu l'suyag la'oretz is bala karka chayiv, something which is necessary to watch the basic necessities for the field to be watched properly, is then is bala karka chayiv. The bala karka is chayiv, the owner of the karka is chayiv. However, the davar shehu l'shmira yisera, something which is extra shmira, says over there is a choiker ea makabel chayiv. That's already something which the choiker and makabel has to pay. So in other words, the basic necessities of the field, that's something which the owner of the field has to pay. Masha'inkin, and the extras, those that is l'shmira yisera, that's something that the person that's actually working on the field, either he's renting the field and he's paying produce, a certain amount of produce, or he's a makabel, he's paying a certain percentage of the produce, so that's his obligation to pay. Now, hakardum shechefrim be'aretz, the shovel which they dig the ground, and va'kelim shenesin b'em offer, the kelim that they have to bring the offer out of the ground to wherever they have to bring it, or va'adliva kadu kietzben shedelim b'em amayim, which they collect the water. In others, the buckets and the various different kelim that they bring the water, which is basic necessities in order to have a field, that's al balakarka. That's something which the balakarka, so the basic necessities of the field, the owner of the field has to provide. However, v'chatitas hamekemis shemekaptzim emalmayim, digging out places, cisterns, in order to gather water, so it'll be easier. We won't have to take every time schlep a jug of water. You gather the water in one big place, and from there you bring it to the rest of the field. So that's already al hachoik or el makabel. That's something on the person that's either renting the field or the person that was makabel, that's the sharecropper of the field. So that's his obligation. So it's the same idea, because this is something, there's the basic necessity, and then there's the extras. Halacha gimel. Hasoicher makabel sodim mechaveri l'shanim mu'otis. A person that rents, or he's as we say a makabel, he made up to use the field and he's going to pay a percentage. And it's just a limited amount, shanim mu'otis, few amount of years. Is lei yizra and a pishta. You shouldn't plant flax, because flax weakens the field. When you plant flax, it weakens the field, and it takes 7 years for the field to regenerate in order to become back to what it was. So mainly, since you're only renting it for shanim mu'otis, so therefore you shouldn't rent it flax. However, sochra a kibla sheva shanim, if you rented it for 7 years, so then is zoira shana rishena. So the first year you could plant it, pishton, and then there will be the 6 years afterwards, and then the 7th year after that, that's when the owner will get it back, and then it'll already be regenerated. So in other words, after 6 years, the 7th year, it's already regenerated. And then the Rambam says ve'ena shviyas min haminyan. Now ve'ena shviyas min haminyan, b'pashtus means that when a person says I'm going to rent something for 7 years, he says 7 years. So he means 7 years that he could use the field. Now, since Shemitah, he's not going to really be able to use the field. Shemitah, you're not allowed to work on the field. So when you make a deal for 7 years, so 7 years doesn't include Shemitah. However, Sochra ikiblo shavua echad, if the deal was not 7 years, but he said shavua echad, which shavua echad means it means a set of 7 years. But normally a Shvuah Echad means an entire Shemitah from the first year until Shemitah. So then is a Shviyas min haminyan. So l'chura, it's two separate dinim over here. One din is, there's one din about planting pishton, and there's another din about when a person makes a deal of 7 years, so then eina Shviyas min haminyan. And if a person makes a deal for a Shavua, so then Shaviyas is min haminyan. The question is, when a person, for example, rents it for 7 years, so the Rambam says Zoira Shana Rishena Pishta. Then the Rambam says Ve'ena Shviyas min haminyan. So the question is that l'chura it's Eina Shviyas min haminyan. So be'emes the owner is not going to get it back until 8 years. In other words, he rented it for 7 years, but l'peil it's going to be in his possession for 8 years, because Shemitah, one of the years is going to be Shemitah, and that's not going to count. So l'chura, if that's the case, so he should be able to Zirei Pishta not only the first year but also the second year. Because Lepel guy, Mashal, if he rents it, let's say for a Shavua, so the first year he can be Zireya Pishton, and then there'll be 6 years that there won't be any Pishton, and then the year after that'll have it. So as long as there'll be 6 years after the Pishton, that's fine. So L'chur, if he rents it for 7 years, so he's going to end up having it 8 years because one of the years is Shemitah. So L'chur, the din should also be that he should be able to be Zireya on the second year, because Lepel there'll be 6 years. Let's say he rents it on the first year of Shemitah. So he rents it the first, let's say, if the second year of Shemitah, he makes Pishton, and then from there on till Shemitah, plus the year after Shemitah will be 6 years, and then the year after that, the other person will get it. So there's a deal about it. There's a deal. It's like the Rambam L'chur is mixing two separate halachas. First halacha is that you Yizra and a Pishton, because you have to give, that it should be the 7th year when he gets it back. And then there's another din that ve'ena shviyas min haminyan. However, Shavua Echad is a shviyas min haminyan. And some people want to say that it depends on chutzlars and Eretz Yisrael. So the first part of the din is that you only could do it the Shana Rishena because it's in chutzlars, so there's no musik of shviyas. And then there's another din in Eretz Yisrael. There's a special din eina shviyas min haminyan. And tak over there, you'd be able to plant it the second year. So the Rambam doesn't say it, but I'll call upon l'chura the seichel. The pashtus should be that way, that the second year, if eina shviyas min haminyan, you should be able to plant it the second year also pishtim. Halacha dalet. Hachoiker oyamakabel sodim mechavere. A person goes ahead and he rents a sodim mechavere, either he rents it, making up a certain amount of money, a certain amount of tfur that he's going to give, or hamakabel, a certain percentage, and lepel v'hi beis hashalchem. Beis hashalchem is a field that it needs irrigation. It's not a field which is enough to have the rainwater. It needs to be irrigated. Or it's a field that besides the field where you're going to plant on also has an area for trees, and those area of trees is also part of the deal. You'll have the trees also, the benefit of the trees. That's part of the deal. And lepel v'yavish hamayan shel beis hashalchem. The spring that was irrigating the beis hashalchem dried out. The large river is still there, and maybe you're able to still get water from the large river. It's just till now it was much easier to get it from the Mayon, and now you have to go and get it from the large river. You're still able to go take buckets of water from the large river and irrigate the field. Another situation. So again, the tree that was on the Beis Ilonis got cut off. So in other words, l'chura, you don't have as good as a deal as you were expecting. Because you're renting a field, and or you're renting the field with the intent of giving them a certain percentage. And lepel, you thought that there was over there a Mayon, and there was also Ilonis. And lepel, now there's no Mayon, and lepel, now there's no Ilonis. So l'chura, you don't really have as good of a deal. So l'chura, you want to deduct from what you owe the owners. On that he says, no. Eina menakale michakure. You're not menakale michakure. So since something had happened after you rented the field, so to speak, it's kila mazol chagarim. It's something that happened to you. He rented you a field. It's not that there's no field there. There's still a field there and it's working, but it's not as good as you expected, and it happened while it was in your rental. So memela, you can't deduct from how much you owe him. However, v'makas medinei, if it was a makas medina, in other words, it wasn't something that happened to your field, it was something that happened to everyone's field. Again, shiyavish hanor, the entire river dried out. So mele, it's not really your problem, it's a problem of everyone. So then he can't tie in his mazol chagarim, because b'pashtus, it was everyone's problem. So therefore, menakale michakure, then he does deduct from how much he has to pay him. So in other words, he made up a deal to pay him a certain amount, and Lepel right now, according to the matzav now, he would have never paid this type of amount. So if the matzav now changed only for him, so then if it's something that changed for everyone, then menakale michakure. Now hoya emed b'tei chasoda, when they made the deal originally, v'amalei beis hashalchen hazeh ani maskelecha. In other words, he was standing in the field, and then he said, beis hashalchen hazeh ani maskelecha. So since he was standing in the field, so there was no need to say hazeh. Obviously, we're talking about hazeh. He's saying, Amalei beis hashalchen hazeh ani maskelecha, or beis o'ilon zeh ani maskelecha. So it was like clearly argued that this is what I'm renting you. And then Yavish Hamayim Meniktus O'ilon says Menakale Mechakure, because since Lepel he was standing in the field and he said hazeh, so the deal was only the way it is now. Masha'enkin, if things are going to change, so that's not the deal, and therefore he has to be menakale mechakure. Sharei hu eimed b'teicha, he was standing in the field. V'liyamalei hazeh, the only reason why he added the word hazeh, lik mishaymer kamei shuat ani maskelecha. I'm renting it to you as it is now, and if it's going to change from its massive as it is now, so taka, you're not going to have that same mischaybus. Lefichach im leo eimed b'teicha, if he wasn't standing in the field, v'amalei beis hashalchen ani maskelecha, a beis ha'ilon, and v'yavish hamayin and niktzas, so then ain't a menakale b'chakura. And the Rambam is not so clearly, because l'chura, if he's leya yomed b'teicha, so even if he said hazeh, because bishleim, if he's yomed b'teicha, so then the question is, why is he saying hazeh? Masha'enkin, if he was leya yomed b'teicha, so what's the taich amalei beis hashalchen and maskelecha? Even if he said beis hashalchen hazeh, because he points at that beis hashalchen, he would also ain't a menakale b'chakura, because the word hazeh is not miyutar. So some people want to say that it means v'amalei beis hashalchen, and he described the beis hashalchen. He didn't just say beis hashalchen. He said he described the beis hashalchen, and there was a reason for him to describe the beis hashalchen. So therefore, eina menakale b'chakure. It knows the pashtus hadvarim is eina menakale b'chakure. The only time is menakale b'chakure if there's an indication in the original deal that he's giving him only as is, and memela, since it's not as is, so therefore is menakale. Therefore, it's not as is. So therefore, menakale b'chakure. Halacha hasoicher mekabel sodim mechaveri, and va'ochlo chagav ein shtatfa. So here something happened. Either a locust came, or something happened, an irregular thing that happened and caused that the field should get ruined. The question is, does he deduct from the amount of money that he has to pay the owner? So the Vaysoicher is Pasha, does he deduct from the amount of money that he made up to pay rent? Benegea, someone that's a makabel, is also the question is, in other words, the deal was that he's going to take a certain percentage because he was assuming that he's working on this whole field and he's going to end up with a considerable amount. But now that this would happened, so therefore he wants to lower the percentage, Bepashas, that he's paying the owner, because Lepel, he put so much work into it and he's only getting very little. So the question is, could he deduct from what he owes the owner? That's the question. Does it? Im ira dover zel reba sodesh leisoyer. If this is something that happened to most of the fields in that area, and therefore you don't assume that it's a fault of the seicher, but you rather assume that it's psamakas medina, so then menakali mechakuri akel if he has sheiri, he could take off, he could deduct from how much he has to pay him, because lepel, since we see that it's not something which is his fault, it's not his mazel, and therefore he could deduct from how much he has to pay the owner of the field. However, if it's something that was late pashta makabrei vasodas, so therefore we could assume that it was his mazel, so therefore therefore he could not deduct. Now what happens if it's something that didn't happen to all the fields of the area, and lepel sulachur, it's an indication that it's his mazel. But on the other hand, it happened to all the fields of the owner of this field. So the owner of this field had a number of other fields, and to all his fields this happened, and it happened also to this field. So l'chura, Taka didn't happen to all the fields of the area, but on the other hand, l'chura, the fact that it happened to all the fields of the owner, that's an indication that it's the fault of the owner of the field. Somehow or another it is mazel. So we say no. Even though all the fields of the balakarka also l'chura got hurt, so mele dus a raya that it's a result of the balakarka. So we know that since it didn't happen to all the fields in the area, so therefore we assume that it's the fault of the seicher, and therefore he is not menaka. Now l'chura, what's the seichel? So on that the Gemara says, because we have a klal, kinish'arnu me'at miharbi. There's some musik that the Eibishter doesn't completely hit you completely. He leaves over a little bit. So the masker is tiny. I was being hit. In other words, there was some mazel of mine that was causing me to lose. But Bepashas, if not for the fact that you also have a bad mazel, so then you would have been able. I would have been sharnim at meharba on your field. To understand the havanas advarim, but that's what the Gemara says, that he would have said nisharnim at meharba. And the fact that your field was laka is as a result of your mazel as well. Is your mazel as well, or your mazel beikar, and therefore you have to pay me. You have to pay me. So in other words, if it's something that happened to the entire area, so we say it has nothing to do with the mazel of the seicher. Mashenkin, if it's something that didn't happen to the entire area, so then we assume it's connected to the mazel of the seicher, even though it happened to all the fields of the masker. Akopam, that's the din. Now, nishtatfu kol hasodah shel seicher ea mekabel. Now, what happens if nishtatfu kol hasodah shel seicher ea mekabel, which is l'chura raya that it's his mazel? Aval pi sheposhta makeb rei vasodas, which l'chura, the fact that poshta makeb rei vasodas l'chura has nothing to do with his mazel. Says also again over here is ein menakli b'chakure. So then again he doesn't deduct from the rent. She'ein zeh hefsed tolu el b'seicher shari kol sedes nishtatfu. So over here the fact that all his fields were nishtatfu is an indication that it's his mazel. If let's say there's nothing specific about all the fields of the masker or all the fields of the seicher, so then it depends whether it was all the fields in the area. So then we assume it has nothing to do with the mazel of the seicher, and if it wasn't all the fields in the areas, or most of the fields in the area, then we assume it's the mazel of the seicher. That's din number one. Now this din that we assume it's the mazel of the seicher, if all the fields of the masker were nishtatfu, but nevertheless we say that it should have been nish'arnu ma'at miharbi, and therefore we assume it's the mazel of the seicher. Now what happens if all the fields of the area were nishtatfu, which l'chur is a raya that has nothing to do with the seicher, but on the other end the seicher's field all the seicher's fields were nishtatfu, so then we say that it's the mazel of the seicher, because you see all his fields was nishtatfu. Why can't the Seicher Taina know? It's not the fact that this field was nishtadif. It's not because of my mazel, because of the general area. Because if not for that, it would have been niskayim by me. Nisharnu me'at miharbe. So on that, it brought Nishita brings him Bob Metzia. He says the kiyum of nisharnu me'at miharbe only happens in your own field. This Seicher is not his field. He's renting a field. So since he's renting a field, so Memela, you wouldn't be Mekayim Nish'arna Ma'at Maharba. So Memela, the fact that all his fields were Loka is a raya that it's his mazel. And Memela, so even though it was also all the fields in the area were Loka, but Lepel, the fact that his fields were Loka, so Memela is considered his mazel. Al Kopam, that's the din. The din is Azay, that if all the fields in the area were Nishtadif, so generally the Seicher could deduct, unless all his fields were also nishtadif. That's unless all his fields were nishtadif. If not all the fields of the area were nishtadif, so then he cannot deduct because lepel it's his mazel, and even if all the fields of the masker was nishtadif. Hisnol of balakarka she's renechitim and v'zora seirim. Oh, that's one case. Eisheli zora klal. Or he was made up with him that he should be Zireya, and Lepel, he was laser Zara Klal. That's a second case. Eshe Zara v'leitzomcho, or he planted it, and then it was leitzomcha, and then Lepel, he had an opportunity to be planted again. And Afal Pisha B'chogov, Eshidofon, V'hukas Reva Medina, is Eine Menakale Mechakure. So it's all three cases coming B'hem Shel Afal Pisha Bo. In other words, a person, the din is, which the Ram says at the end of the halacha, is that when a person plants and it doesn't work out, so then he has to replant. So if a person was zireya v'leit tzomcha, so the din is he has to replant. So if a person was zireya and then it was igia chogov, so then really he doesn't have to replant. But if a person did what he was supposed to do, and lepel, it came a plague and they ate it up, so then he doesn't have to replant. But in a normal situation, if a person plants and it didn't work out, so a person has to replant. So memela, so that's this din. Is nochamal. His nola balakarka she Israel nechitim and v'zora seirim, and at the end a shidofim came, and anyways everything got ruined. So memela, even if he would have had chitim, it would have gotten ruined. So lepel, he didn't do what he was supposed to do, but l'maynaf kemina. So in that we say that the owner of the field was davening for chitim. Lepel, there was seirim over there, so that's why he wasn't matzliach. About kol ponim, since he didn't do what he was supposed to do, so therefore he doesn't have the excuse of the shidofim. That's one case. Eishel Zara Klal, if he was Lei Zara Klal, l'chur it's poshut that he doesn't have an excuse. He was Lei Zara Klal, and even though later on a shidofim came, l'chur he's taining that even if it would have been there, it wouldn't have happened. So now we say no, that if it would have been there, so then there would have been this kind of a pasuk that says that in something that there's there that the bracha is sheira. Shemela, had he have done it, there would have been atzlocha. Oi shezara, or he planted it. It's a third case. Zara v'leitzomcha. So only these three cases. And lepel afal pi shebo choga v'shidofen and lepel v'hukas reva medina. So l'churi is taining. Even if I would have done what I was supposed to do, saivi nothing would have happened. Nevertheless, eini menakle mechakure. He's not able to deduct because lepel he didn't do his part of the deal. And maybe if he would have done what he was supposed to do, so then there would have been the field. When a person, let's say, plants and it doesn't grow, so how much is he chayav litapel v'lizrei pam acheres? Is imli tzomcha? Is kozman shiroi lizrei beisim makom. As long as now is the time that still people that come late are still planting, so that's where the roi lizrei beisim makom. So you're chayav to be metapel bel, even though you planted it already once and it didn't work. Halacha vav. Hasoicher e'amekabel sodim echavere is makom. There's places where you just cut it, so you leave the roots in the ground, or there's places where you uproot it, you pull it out, so maybe you pull it out with the roots. Is a seicher on makabel sadim chaver. Mokim shenago licks to the place where they cut it, and they leave the roots in the ground. Is yikser fakert ve'einer ashoy laker. You could not uproot it because lapel the roots that rot in the ground are good for the field. On laker, those places where they uproot it is yaker ve'einer ashoy likzer because maybe he wants to have a clean field. Ushnei maktim zelza, sai the seicher and sai the owner of the field could be makav. He could taina, I'd rather you uproot it so it should be clean, or I'd rather you don't uproot it so it should have that that should rot in it. And al derech zeh, the other person, kataina, I'd rather uproot it to have more of my produce. There's the person that's renting the field saying, I want to uproot it in order to have more produce, or I'd rather just cut it to make it easier for me. So either way, when the minig is one of them and the other one is tiny, you should do the other. So therefore, each one can be makif. Now, umakim shenagu lachar shachar, that after you harvest the field, then you go ahead and plow the field, is yachrish. You have to plow the field. Mokim shenagu lahasker ilonis al gabe karka is maskirin, though it's a pashta zach, that when you rent a field, besides the open area in the field which you're going to plant, the trees that are on the field are also part of the deal. Even though l'chura he gave him a lower price, so l'chura he kataina, the reason why I gave you a lower price because I wasn't including the trees, which are normal to be included. So nevertheless, that's not a taina. The taina is if it's normal to include the trees in the rental of a field. So even though lepel it was a lower price, but he kataina that minastam, it's considered the trees are considered part of the rental, and therefore that's also part of it. Umakim shenago shalei laskri lonis is also a leilonis. Afal pi shesachar mimenu b'yesem anayidua. So the renter is telling I paid a higher price. So I thought I'm paying a higher price because it has trees, and even though normally trees aren't included, but I understood from the higher price that it was included. Is also that doesn't really change anything. If you didn't specify clearly these tanoim, so we assume that it goes kiminig medina, and the fact that you paid more, you paid less, is not an indication of a change of the minig medina. Hakel kiminig medina. Halacha zayin hakoiker sodim mechaveri ba'aseres kurim chitim. The deal was that he's going to give him 10 kur of chitim. That's going to be the rent. And lepel is lux. The field was like the field didn't do so well. So the din is noisnal metecha. He could give the produce of that field, even though that field wasn't such good quality. Nevertheless, he could give from this field. This is the field he's renting, and this is the field that he made up. So he made up to give him the produce. So even though he didn't make up clearly that it's the produce of this field, but we assume that he's able to give him the produce of this field. Now, fakir yofis, if the produce of the field that he's renting is yofis, a very good, these are very good produce. I don't want to give you such good produce. I'd rather buy not such high quality produce elsewhere and give you no. Say no. So it works both ways. In other words, even though a choker didn't make up to give a certain percentage of the field, he made up to give a certain amount of produce, but nevertheless we assume that the produce should be from this field, and therefore it works both ways. If it's not such good quality produce, so he's able to give him from this field, and if it's very high, if it's good quality produce, so then the owner of the field could demand that he gives him from this field. That's this thing. Now, chokar mimenu kerem basora salamanov vikrisu achash niftzru. So as the case before, we were talking about that they grew a poor quality. Over here, it's nachmer a bigger chiddush, that he already harvested, and lepel vikrisu, it turned down in quality, it became a little sour after they were harvested. And v'chein amorim shaloku, amorim, bundles of wheat, that also were like that became lesser quality, achash niftzru, is nevertheless neisling b'techem, because since this grew from this field, and then it turned out to be not such high quality, so lepel he could give from this field, just like if he would have grown lesser quality, so al derech zeh, if it became lesser quality, achash niftzru. However, that's talking about if it was only hikrisu or local. He made up with him that he's going to give him 10 jugs of wine. And lepel v'chichmetz, and that wine became vinegar, so it's no longer the wine that m'tageret. So then it's chayiv little yayin tev. So he has to give him yayin tev. So you can't say, listen, this is the wine from here, it became yichmetz. Since lepel, now it became wine, and now it's already yichmetz. So therefore he cannot give him from, he can't give, that can't fulfill the deal of the chakira. Chokra mimenu b'meya amorim shel aspasta. He made up that he's going to give him 100 amorim of aspasta, certain measurement, and lepel v'zora minacher. So this person that was renting the field didn't really do what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to go and plant aspasta and give him from that aspasta. Lepel, he went ahead and zora min. Aspasta grows quite quickly, but v'zora minacher and v'acharka chorsha. Then he went ahead and plowed the field, and v'zora aspasta. Now he planted the second planting was aspasta. And lepel v'loksa, and the second planting of aspasta was loksa. Oy shezora betchila aspasta v'chorsha, and now he doesn't have that aspasta anymore. V'acharka zora pa'am acheres, now he planted a second set of aspasta and buloksa, but it's all the things that he's doing not as the original deal. So then, now if the second quality is not so good, he can't go ahead and say, listen, it came from this field, so therefore I'm giving it to you. So the din is that when a person goes ahead and plants the field as he was meant to plant, so even though it comes out lower quality, he can give it to the owner as being the quality, the produce that he was supposed to provide him. And if it was very good quality, he's mechuyev to give from that very good quality. Masha'inkin, if he did something he was shina, he didn't do what he was supposed to do, so b'chiyah gavna, he can't give him from the lower quality, and he has to give him better quality. Halacha ches, hachoiker sodim mechaveri, again, a person, he's hiring a field from someone, and v'leirotzen l'nachash, he didn't want to start taking out the weeds while it was growing, v'amrlein, he's telling you, ma hefsid yesh lecha. What difference does it make to you that I should take out the weeds right now? When you take out the weeds, the tfuah grows better. She says, good, the tfuah will grow better, but lepeil, I'm going to give you anyways the amount that I told you I'll provide you. So mele, if it won't grow so big, but so I'll have to give you more. But lepeil, you'll get what you're supposed to get. So he says, ein shemle. We don't ein shemle. Why? Shayo emer you're going to leave this field eventually, and then the lepil, if you don't take out the weeds right away, so the weeds take root, mele, even eventually when you're going to take it out, it's going to take it out, but lepil, the weeds are going to keep coming back. So memela, so vaistis, it's better for the field that the weeds should be taken out right away. I'm going to go and plow it, but not only I'll take out the weeds, but I'll actually plow it, so memela, everything will be also in Shimli. Because I want it to be a clean field, and Mamela, I want you to, in other words, that's a normal thing to do, to take out the weeds as it's growing, and therefore he can go ahead and say, I'm going to take out the weeds at the end, and I'll plow it, and everything will be fine. He says, no, I want it to be good the whole time. Halachates. They made up to plant barley, is leizrenu chitim. So the person that's using the field doesn't have a right to plant it chitim. Why? Because it takes more out of the karka to plant chitim than it is seirim. So therefore the deal was to plant seirim, so he has no right to plant chitim. Now fakir, sochra lezara chitim, the deal was that he's going to plant chitim, and lepeh is memeli, is rena seirim, he's allowed to plant it seirim. We're not talking about how much he's going to pay the owner. The owner is going to pay whatever he made up to pay. We're talking about a seicher, bepashtos, or a choiker, even a choiker. He's going to give him that good quality of produce that they made up. But Lepel, the question is, what's he going to do in the field? So the din is that if he made up to Serei Chitim, so the Seirim is taking less out of the field than Chitim, so we assume that the owner is definitely masking, there's no problem. Now that is a kitnis, if he made up to plant kitnis, legumes, is Le'Yisrael and Tvua, because that takes more out of the field. However, Tvua, if he made up to plant Tvua, is Yisrael and Chitim. Tvua is Yisrael and Kitnis. If he made up that he's going to plant it to us, he's allowed to be Zeriya Kitnis, because Kitnis takes less out of the field, and Memela, so Fakir, so the Balabas is even more sufrid. However, over there in Bavel, planting legumes in the field is Makish Daretz, and therefore over there, a person is Bepashtas Mak, but he says made up to plant Tvua, so you have no right to plant Kitnis. Halacha Yud. Hamakabel Sodim Mechaveri L'Shonim Watis. L'Shonim Watis, we'll learn, is less than 7 years. So someone that he's Makabel a field for less than 7 years. Now, Makabel a field means he's going to go and work on the field, and the produce that he'll produce from the field, that's going to be his, and he'll pay. He'll pay by Makabel, generally the din is that he pays a certain percentage, like we learned before. So Makabel Sodim Mechaveri L'Shonim Watis. Ein leMakabel Klum B'Koyres HaShikma U'Kiyetzba. He doesn't have any rights in the trees, in other words, in the wood that's growing on the trees. That's part of the field itself. In other words, he has a right in the Peiris. In the Peiris, if not Mokim, where he gets the Ilonis Agav Sodi, he has the Peiris of the Ilonis. But on the other end, to have rights in the actual wood of the tree, we're talking about an Elon Srak, not an Elon that produces Peiris, an Elon Srak. So he wants to have benefit from the wood of the tree. So since he's having it for a small period of time, which is less than 7 years, so that wood is considered the keren, not the payers. If he has it for 7 years, so then it grows during those 7 years. So it's grows considerably. So maybe he does have a right in the Keres HaShikma, as we'll learn. Masha'inkin, if he's Mekabel Asad L'Chaveri L'Shan Muatis, so the actual branches, which he wants to now use for wood, for Keres, or for whatever, use it for wood, so he has no right. Ein L'Mekabel Klum B'Keres HaShikma K'yetzba. That's number one. And also, V'lei B'Shvachu Ilon Shiyotzu Mi'aleim Basoda. Because if a tree starts growing in the field, so again, that's not considered part of the deal that the Zireh gets. That's considered part of the field, an extent to something that the field is producing, and it has nothing to do with him, and therefore the Mekabel has no right to it. However, Avol Mechashmalei Mikei Meilonis, Kihilo Yehoyebem Oise Zereh Shezoreh B'Chol HaSoda. In other words, lapel, that tree which is growing, now all of a sudden the tree is growing in the middle of the field, is taking up space. That space he would have been able to plant over there, and then he would have been able to benefit from that planting. So the amount of space that it's taking up, and he would have benefited from the planting, so that we do deduct. We say that, listen, over here he could have planted, lapel, you're gaining a tree, so Mele, he could deduct that from what he owes the Baal HaSoda, and Mele put it into his cheshbon, that he deserves to be compensated for this area which the Baal HaSoda is getting a tree, and he's losing the place where he could plant. Now, if the tree is growing in a place where he would have otherwise been zereya there. If it's a place that he wouldn't have been anyways able to plant the seeds, so then it's a mechashmali klum. So the fact that this tree grew, make no cheshbon at all, the tree belongs to the Baal HaSoda, and the Mekabel has no rights to it. That's talking about we're dealing with Mekabel Soda L'Shon Muatis. However, Im Kiblo Sheva Shonim, yes, sir, if he has it for 7 years or more, so then it grows, and what grows on that tree is also considered Paris, and it's a considerable amount, because in 7 years it grows a considerable amount. So then is Yeshli Bekeres Hashikmi Kietz, but then he has a right to what grows on the tree, the wood that grows on the tree, that's also in his rights, that's considered part of the Paris that he's entitled to. Now, Higias Mane Listalik Minasoda. Someone was a Mekabel Soda, now Lepel, now came the time to leave the field. V'hoyusham Zroim, and there were plants over there, Shadayin Legil Limacher, they're not yet up to being sold. In other words, they grew already, but they're not yet they're not completely ripe. Oy Shegomro, they are completely ripe. Abelepel, you don't want to harvest them now, because V'lehigia Yema Shuk Lemachrim, now is not the time to go ahead and sell it, and he's leaving the field today. So the din is shamanei balakarka. So you have to assess how much of these roim are really his. In other words, he's entitled. We're talking about Mekabel, so he's entitled to a percentage. So the question is how much of those roim which he's leaving behind are really his, and that he has to take from the Baal HaSoda. The Baal HaSoda has to pay him for it. So obviously, L'chura means you deduct from what you owe the Baal HaSoda. Now, that's the Shem Shechelik HaMekabel and Balakarka Betfua, the actual kernels of wheat. So the Mekabel and the Balakarka divide amongst each other. Is Kach Chelkim Betevenu Bekash, the stubble and the hay that comes out of the wheat. All of this is divided amongst the owner and the Mekabel. Shem Shechelkin Biyayin, just like they divide the wine that comes out of the vineyard. Kach Chelkim Bizmeris. So there's the vines that grew as a result of what was happening while the time that this Mekabel was there, they also divided. But those sticks that they put under the vines in order to keep the vines up, so it depends. If they bought them together, and if one of them bought it, that those sticks that were bought by one of them, so those sticks, even though he bought it for the field, for the produce, but he bought it, so Mamela he's able to take it. Halacha Yudalef. Hamakabel Sodim Mechaveri Lita. He made up that he's going to go ahead and plant someone's field with trees. Is Mekabel of Bala Soda Eser Burois L'Soda. The person that owns the field understands that in a saw, when you're going to plant in an area of a saw is 50 amas by 50 amas. So we could assume that 10 of those trees, that's what the Rambam's gear said, 10 of those trees are going to be burois, are going to be fields that don't really produce anything. Aber Yisrael Kain, if more than 10 of those trees are burois, so then is Megalgal of Sakel, so then he has to replace all of them. In other words, if there's only 10, It says Beseder, so you don't ask the Makabal anything. Mashenkin, if there's 11, so then he has to replace all 11, because then we consider it that it's his somehow or another negligence of how he did it, or maybe it's his mazel, but I'll call upon him, he didn't do something right, and therefore he has to replace everything. Halacha Yud Beis. HaMekabel Sodim Chaverei V'lei Asis. A person was Mekabel Sodim Chaverei, and that's a Mekabel is talking about again for a percentage, and the field is not producing. And the question is, does he have to redo it? Is im yeshba kadeshet or bechlal? Does he have to continue working? He says what he's doing right now is not kedai. In other words, it's not kedai. In other words, he has a field. He was expecting to have a regular produce, and lepel this didn't produce anything worthwhile. The question is, what's considered worthwhile that the person that was mekabel is still mechuyev to go ahead and work on the field and provide whatever percentage is for the balabas and for himself. Does say im yeshba kadeshet toitzi sosayim. Yes, if the field has enough, you could produce in this field, even though the field is not doing properly. But Lepel, you'd be able to produce 2 saw of tvua. Besides, for the hitzah, to compensate for whatever expenses there are involved in working on this field, because there are expenses involved in working on the field. So then is chayiv makabel itapel. Again, someone accepted upon himself a field, and he's going to give the owner a certain percentage. Lepel, he started working on the field. He sees the field is not doing anything. So Mele, he thinks to himself that all this work that he's going to do on this field is not kedai. In other words, how much is the owner going to get and how much are I going to get? It's not kedai. So the din is that since you accepted upon yourself to work on this field, so if the field is going to be able to produce 2 saw, it's going to be able to produce 2 saw more than the hitzah, more than the expenses that are involved in working on this field, is chayiv ha-mekabel litapel. So the mekabel is mechuyev litapel to go ahead and continue working on the field. That was what he accepted upon himself. Shekach kesev balakarka ani ekom ve'oner ve'ezre ve'ekser ve'amer ve'odush ve'ezre ve'amer kri. So he made up with him. Ani okom, I will get up, ve'oner, and I will plow, ve'ezra, and I will plant, ve'ekser, and I will harvest, the Emer, and I will gather, the Edish, and I will do the Disha, the Ezra, and I will do the Zera, the winnowing, and then the Amer, and then I'll make a Kri, V'amit Kri, then I'll make a Kri, then I'll make a pile. Now how big is a Kri? A Kri, the size of a Kri is a Sosai. That's the size of a Kri. Less than a Kri is not considered, less than Sosai is not called a Kri. So since the deal was V'amit Kri, Lefonecha, and v'titlate chetzye mashiyasnu v'ani etel ashar b'schar amolim min mashayitzeisi. So he has to be able to produce that this field, in order that he should be obligated to continue working on the field, this field has to be able to produce that ultimately v'amit kri, I will have a kri. And a kri means that it'll have 2 saw of tvua. Now what will be with this kri? The kri, they have to make up whatever the deal was, and whatever percentage he gets, and whatever percentage Balabos gets. But we're talking about that there's going to be a kri of ekvasserin. There's going to be something to talk about. So he says, I'm going to do all the work, and obviously if you're going to have to deduct the work from the kri, those the expenses that he put into, not the work, but the expenses that he put into the field, so that's not called v'amet kri. It has to be that there's a kri after all the expenses are done. And then he's taka obligated. He can't say, listen, it's not kedai to do it. He undertook upon himself to do it, and Mele is mechuyev to do it. Halacha Yud Gimel. HaMekabel soda mechaveri. A person was mekabel a soda, v'acher shezocher bo, he left it empty. He didn't do anything. So the din is shomanei sekame hiruya lases. We assess how much should this field have normally produced, and v'noisen lichel keshoya magilin. And he has to pay what he would have given him. Shekach kesel balakar keim oiver, if I will leave it empty, and v'lei aved, and I will not work as I accepted upon myself. Whereas the Mekabel accepted upon himself that I'm renting this field and I'm going to work on this field and I'm going to give you a percentage. But he accepted also upon himself that if I don't work on this field, is ashal b'meitv, I'll pay with meitiv, which is whatever it was supposed to produce, whatever you would have normally gotten. We have to assess what would you have normally gotten, and then I'll pay you b'meitav of what you would have normally gotten. But who adinim haver miktsased? This was talking about haver kula. Adin, if part of the field he didn't do, so we have to assess how much that part of the field would have produced and how much would have the balabas gotten. Now, l'chura, the question is, l'chura, how's there is chayvus? L'chura, it's like a asmachta. Person says, if this and this happens, so then I'll give you in this money. So the din is, we say asmachta lekanya, because he didn't really have a smichas das that that's going to happen. So Mele over here, l'chura also, he's saying, if I don't work, I'll give you money. But l'chura, that's l'chura and asmachta. He didn't do anything to him, but he made up that if this and this happens, he's going to be chayiv. So the Maisa is, so that's what I'm saying. Normally, asmachta is takalikanya. So the Moshe makes up, if this and this happens, I'll give you a certain amount of money, made up as a certain knas like, so Taka doesn't have to pay. Mashenkin over here, if this and this happens, I didn't fulfill my obligation, I caused you a hezek. It wasn't stamazeh, we made up that if this and this happens, I'm going to give you an amount of money. And knows I'm obligated to work for you. And Lepel, if I'm not going to work for you, I'm going to be causing you a hezek. And I'm making up that if I'm going to cause you this hezek, so then I'm going to pay you that amount of money. That's not included in Nasmachta Likani. That's what I'm saying. B'pnei man is chayiv l'shalom. Nishali pasik alatz me dover kosev, just a certain amount of money. Kedei shenei mahariya esmachta. Elihisne sheishalem b'meitva. Uleficha gomer v'shibelatzma. In other words, he was made up that he's going to pay b'meitav of what this thing should have produced. If we made up as just a certain amount, not connected to what this would have produced, is arizas asmachta ve'ene chayav l'shalom. Ella kfi shemashi yiruya lasis b'lad. Because since this is something which this is what it should have produced, and lepel as a result of what he's doing, it didn't produce. So Mele, it's like considered that he was mazik. He was mamash mazik b'yadayim, but it's keel like he was mazik, and he made up that if this is what happens, he's going to pay. So that doesn't go onto the union of asmachta likanya that we say there's a gemiras das. Mele, he is mischayev. Halacha yudal. Mekabel sodo lezora shumshimen. He made up to plant shumshimen sesame, and v'zora chitim. He lepel zora chitim. V'osis chitim sheshavim kama shehiruya lasis ma shumshimen. Lepel the chitim was as worthwhile, in other words, as the same amount, was worth the same amount as sesame would have been worth. Is lepel ain't liol level tarumas? The Baal says, you made up to plant chitim, and I was expecting to get chitim, and lepel you're giving me sesame, but lepel ain't liol of tarumas. Now, however, osis pachas mashiru ilas mashumshman. Had he taka planted the way they made up, he would have made more. And lepel, he made chitim, so memela the balabas is getting less. So then is mishalim we are makabel kfi mashiru ilas is mashumshman. So then the makabel has to reimburse him for the loss he had as a result of the fact that he changed it from shumshman to chitim. Now, osis chitim yes in mashiru ilas is mashumshman. Lepel, he ended up, the deal was to make shumshman. And Lepel, the Makaba went ahead and did chitim. And as a result of the fact that he changed it and did chitim, he ended up having more of a produce than he would have had shumshman. He has more, there was more of a profit. So then, even though Lechuri, he could kind of listen, the more profit is mine. I mean, as far as you're concerned, I would have done shumshman. So we say no. Chelkin lefi mashe used to be named the chelik according to the Tnai, according to the percentage. Afal Pishim is Takar Balakarka, even though Balakarka is gaining more, and the deal was originally Chitim, but Sof Kol Sof, Lepel, this was his field that was producing, and Memele, he's entitled to the percentages that they made up Lechatchila.